A folded, notarized letter sat in the dirt next to a man's boot. The boot was cracked. The sole was wired on with baling twine. The man bent down. He picked the letter up. He brushed sage dust off the envelope. He read his own name on the front. He had not seen his own name written on a piece of paper in 11 years. He looked up at a Wyoming sky the color of cold gunmetal. He folded the letter once. He put it inside his coat. He picked up his pack. He started walking west, toward a mountain range he had not seen since 1971, toward a cabin he had never set foot in, toward 80 acres of rock and stream he did not yet know were worth $265 million. They called him Caleb Brennan, 60 years old, homeless, a Vietnam veteran, a man who had owned nothing but his rifle and his coat for the last 12 years. What did a man with nothing find on a piece of nothing that turned out to be the richest piece of ground in the state of Wyoming? Stay with me on this one. 2 weeks earlier, Caleb Brennan was sleeping in a draw south of Riverton, Wyoming. He had rolled out his bedroll under a rabbit brush. He had banked a small fire of dry sage against the cold. He slept with his rifle under the bedroll and his pack as a pillow. He had been doing this for 12 years. Some men called it homeless. Caleb called it living thin. In spring, he worked fence lines for ranchers. In summer, he hired on at hay crews. In fall, he guided elk hunters out of a camp east of Dubois. In winter, he went down to a missionary shelter in Lander, slept on a cot, and worked the kitchen for his keep. He had a service record from 2 tours in Vietnam that he kept folded in a Ziploc bag at the bottom of his pack. He had a Bronze Star inside the same bag, still in its case. He had never married. He had never had children. His sister had passed in 2011, and he had not learned of it until 2014. He did not own a phone. He did not own a vehicle. He did not own a watch. He read the sky for time and the wind for weather. The morning the letter found him, he had walked into the post office in Riverton to mail a money order. He had earned $90 working 2 days at a hay crew, and he was sending 40 of it to the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall in Casper, where another old man he had served with was running low on heating oil. The clerk knew him. The clerk knew most of the men who came through with money orders and cash in envelopes. The clerk slid a buff envelope across the counter. "This came for you," the clerk said. "From a law office in Cheyenne. They've had it on hold since February. Wouldn't release it without ID and a witness. Marshal Coons signed off on it last Thursday after he saw you in here." Caleb took the envelope. He looked at it for a long time. He did not open it in the post office. He walked 4 blocks to the bench outside the laundromat. He sat down. He opened it there. The letter was on heavy paper. The kind of paper a lawyer uses when he wants the paper itself to convince you of something. The letterhead at the top said Bickle and Maurer, Attorneys at Law, Cheyenne, Wyoming. The body of the letter was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph said that one Mr. Hollis Brennan, deceased February 11th of the previous year, had named Caleb Brennan as the sole heir to his estate. Caleb read the name twice. Hollis Brennan. He had heard the name once, when he was 9 years old, from his father, who had spat the name like a bad piece of meat, and said that Caleb had an uncle out west somewhere who had broken with the family and never been spoken of again. That had been the only time. Caleb had not thought of Hollis Brennan in 51 years. The second paragraph described the estate. 80 acres of land in the Wind River Range, parcel number listed by section and township. 1 cabin, approximately 400 square feet, last occupied in 1986. 1 root cellar. Subsurface mineral rights to the parcel, held in perpetuity by separate filing. Water rights on a year-round mountain stream that ran the length of the eastern boundary, also held by separate filing. Last assessed valuation of the surface, $2,400. The letter noted that the cabin was condemned. The letter noted that there was no road access for the last 7 miles. The letter noted that the parcel had been the subject of several purchase offers in the last decade, the most recent for $50,000, all of which had been refused by the estate pending location of the named heir. The third paragraph said that Mr. Bickel, the senior partner, would be available to transfer the deed upon Caleb's appearance at the firm's office in Cheyenne, with identification. The letter noted that travel expenses could be reimbursed against the estate. The letter was signed in real ink by a man named Whitcomb Bickel. Caleb folded the letter. He put it back in the envelope. He walked to the marshal's office. He showed Marshal Coons the letter. Coons read it. Coons whistled. Coons said, "Caleb, that's a real document. I can drive you to Cheyenne myself in the morning." Caleb said, "Cheyenne's 300 miles. Coons said, "I'll drive you. I owe your boys from the VFW about 6 favors. Call it the 7th. Caleb said, "I'll think about it." He walked out. He walked east out of town until he was past the last fence post. He camped that night in a coulee he had used before. He cooked a real fire this time. He boiled coffee. He drank it slow. He pulled the letter out again. He read it 3 more times by firelight. Then he made his decision. He was not going to Cheyenne first. He was going to the cabin first. He had spent 12 years walking the country at his own pace. He had walked from Wyoming to Montana and back. He had walked from Lander to the South Dakota line and back. He had walked the entire eastern slope of the Wind River Range twice. He knew how to walk to a piece of ground. He wanted to see the place before any lawyer told him what it was. He wanted to put his hand on the door of the cabin before he signed a piece of paper that said he owned it. He wanted to know whether the old man Hollies had built something worth keeping, or whether he had built a tomb. He banked his fire. He rolled out his bedroll. He slept like a man who had a destination for the first time in a long time. In the morning, he walked back into Riverton. He bought a tin of bacon, 3 pounds of jerky, a pound of cornmeal, 6 waxed candles, a new pair of wool socks, and a topographic map of the Wind River Range. He paid in cash. The total came to $28.91. The clerk gave him the change in coins. He let the coins jingle into the bottom of his pack. He looked at the map for an hour. He found the section and township numbers from the letter. He marked the parcel with a pencil. It was on the east face of the Wind River Range, in a fold of the mountain that had no road and no trail. The nearest 2-track was 7 miles below the cabin. A man in a vehicle could not get there. A man on foot with a pack and a rifle and a topographic map could get there in 4 days if he didn't break a leg. Caleb shouldered his pack. He started walking. The first day he walked 28 miles. The second day, 24. The third day he climbed, sage to grass to pine to spruce, the air thinner, the wind colder. He camped above 10,000 feet with his second pair of socks on his hands, because his gloves had given out 2 years ago. The fourth day he found the cabin. It sat in a meadow on the lip of a stream. The stream ran clear over pink granite, the kind of stream a fly fisherman would describe to his children for 40 years. The meadow was maybe 2 acres, ringed with spruce and aspen. The cabin sat at the back of the meadow, against a rock outcrop that rose another 300 feet behind it. The cabin was bigger than he had expected. Square logs dovetailed. A stone chimney on the east wall. A porch on the south side. Glass windows broken now, rags stuffed in the holes. A door off one hinge. The cabin looked like something a man had built carefully a long time ago, and had stopped maintaining 30 years back. Caleb walked the meadow before he went inside. He drank from the stream. The water tasted like rock and spruce needle and snowmelt. He could see trout in the pool below the cabin. He could see deer sign at the edge of the aspen. He walked back to the cabin. He pulled the door open. He stepped inside. The cabin had been lived in for years. There was a wood stove against the chimney wall, cast iron intact. There was a bunk against the north wall, with a straw tick rotted to dust. There was a table built into the south wall, planks worn smooth. There was a shelf with 3 tin cups and a kerosene lamp. There was a hat hanging on a peg, a man's felt hat, brim curled with age. There was a Bible on the shelf. Caleb opened it. The flyleaf said, "To Hollies. From your mother. May this land be your country, 1947. There was a photograph tucked inside the Bible. A man in a wool shirt and a felt hat, standing in front of the cabin, holding a string of trout. The man had Caleb's father's nose. The man had Caleb's father's jaw. The man was about 50 years old in the picture, and the picture was old. Caleb looked at his uncle for the first time. He put the photograph on the table. He spent the rest of the day cleaning. He hauled the rotted straw tick out of the cabin and burned it. He swept the floor with a juniper branch. He pulled rags out of the broken windows and stacked them for kindling. He wiped the wood stove down. He found a stack of split pine in the lean-to behind the cabin, cut 20 years ago and dried hard as iron, and he laid a fire in the stove and got it going. He boiled coffee. He ate a strip of jerky and a piece of cornbread he cooked on the flat top of the stove. Then he went looking for the cellar. The letter had said there was a root cellar. He had not seen one outside. He walked the perimeter of the cabin twice. He found at the back, half hidden by a drift of old spruce needles, a slanting wooden door set into the slope behind the cabin. He pulled the door open. Stone steps led down into the rock outcrop. The cellar was not dug. It was carved. His uncle had cut a chamber into the granite itself, 12 feet by 10 feet, with a floor of poured concrete and walls of bare rock. The ceiling was low. The air was cold and dry and clean. It was the smell of stone places. He lit a candle. He stepped inside. The cellar had shelves along 3 walls. The shelves held mason jars, most of them broken, the contents long gone. There were 3 wooden crates on the floor. There was a tin trunk against the back wall, banded with brass, padlocked. He did not have a key. He did not need one. The padlock had rusted through. He twisted it. It came off in his hand. He opened the trunk. Inside the trunk were papers. Hundreds of papers in folders in oilcloth wraps, in neat stacks bound with twine. Caleb lifted the top folder. The folder was labeled in pencil in a steady old man's handwriting, Wind River Parcel. Geological Survey, 1958. Caleb sat down on the floor of the cellar. He set the candle on the trunk. He opened the folder. The survey was the work of a man named Dr. Eugene Carstens of the United States Geological Survey, working out of the Denver office. The survey was 38 pages long. It was bound in a paper cover, stamped with the federal seal dated October of 1958. The first page was a topographic map of the parcel. Caleb recognized it. It was his land. The second page was a summary. Caleb read the summary slowly. He had to read it twice to make sure he had it right. The parcel, the summary said, sat over a vein of mineralized rock running in a northwest to southeast direction along the western edge of the meadow, daylighting at the base of the rock outcrop directly behind the cabin. The vein was approximately 1,400 feet wide and ran the entire length of the parcel and an unknown distance beyond. The mineralization included 2 principal elements: uranium, pitchblende and uraninite in commercially significant grades, and copper, native copper and chalcocite in extraordinary purity. The estimated tonnage, the survey said, was conservative. The estimated value, the survey said, at 1958 prices, would exceed $12 million if the vein ran true. The survey also noted that the parcel held senior water rights on the stream, filed in 1947 by Hollis Brennan, and that those water rights, in any future water-scarce era, would themselves carry significant commercial value. The survey was signed by Dr. Carstens. It was countersigned by a regional supervisor, whose name Caleb could not read. It was stamped, dated, and filed with the Wyoming State Engineer's Office. There was a receipt of filing pinned to the inside of the folder, dated November 4th, 1958. Caleb closed the folder. He sat in the cellar with the candle burning low. He understood, sitting there, why no lawyer had been able to find him for 14 months. Hollis Brennan had not died with a will that gave the land to a stranger. He had given it to the only person in the family who shared his blood and was unaccounted for. He had given it to a man he had never met. He had given it on purpose. Caleb opened the next folder. The next folder was the water rights filing. Hollis Brennan claimant. Wind River Stream, full flow year-round, for irrigation, domestic and beneficial uses, with senior priority dating to November 6, 1947. The filing covered the stream from the headwaters down through the parcel and continued for an unknown distance below. It was a perfected water right. It had been filed within 4 months of the construction of the cabin. Hollis Brennan had known what he was doing in 1947. The third folder was correspondence. Letters from a mining company called Continental Resources, Incorporated, based in Salt Lake City. The first letter was dated 1973. It offered Hollis Brennan $12,000 for the parcel. The second letter was dated 1981. It offered $18,000. The third letter was dated 1992. It offered $35,000. The fourth letter was dated 2004. It offered $50,000 and was signed by an attorney named Marcus Krell. Each of the letters described the parcel as remote, inaccessible, of marginal value, and a generous offer. Hollis Brennan had answered none of them. The fourth folder was a private journal. Hollis Brennan's handwriting, year by year, from 1947 to 1986. The entries were short. Weather, game, visitors. Caleb read the last entry, dated October 9, 1986. The entry said, "My hand isn't steady enough anymore. I'm going down to Riverton in the morning. I will not come back up. The cabin is for the next Brennan who walks up here. If no Brennan ever does, the cabin can fall in. The mountain doesn't owe me a name on the door." Caleb closed the journal. He sat in the cellar a long time. He climbed the stone steps back up to the meadow. The sun was setting over the west ridge. The stream was running pink with the light. The meadow was full of mule deer that had come out to graze in the cool. They saw him on the porch and watched him for a moment, and then they went back to grazing, because they had not been hunted on this meadow in 40 years, and they did not know what a man was. Caleb stood on the porch. He thought about the homeless veterans in the shelter in Lander. He thought about the men he knew who slept under the bridge in Casper. He thought about the friend in the VFW hall who could not afford heating oil. He thought about his uncle, Hollis Brennan, sitting in this cabin alone for 39 years, refusing every offer, waiting for someone in his blood to walk up the mountain. He went back inside the cabin. He fed the stove. He drank coffee. He slept on the floor with his bedroll because the bunk would need rebuilding. In the morning he walked. Not back the way he had come. He walked the other direction, out the back of the parcel, following a faint elk trail along the rim of the outcrop. The trail led him in a long curve down the back of the mountain, to a logging road he had seen on the topographic map. The logging road took him to gravel road. The gravel road took him to a cattle ranch, where a man named Foley still ran a few hundred head. Foley knew Caleb. Caleb had worked Foley's fences in 2009. Foley drove him into Crowheart and let him use the telephone in the ranch office. Caleb called Marshall Coons in Riverton. Coons answered on the second ring. Caleb said, "I need to get to Cheyenne. And I need to bring a man with me." Coons said, "Who's the man?" Caleb said, "A professor of geology. An independent one. Not one that works for a mining company." Coons said, "I know a man at the university in Laramie. Dr. Pearl. He's been retired for 10 years. He doesn't take money from anyone anymore. He'd do it as a favor if I asked." Caleb said, "Ask him." Coons asked him. Dr. Wilbur Pearl, professor emeritus of economic geology at the University of Wyoming, met Marshall Coons and Caleb Brennan in Lander 3 days later. Pearl was 78 years old. He had a white beard. He had reading glasses on a string around his neck. He drove a 1996 Ford pickup that looked older than it was. The three of them drove to the logging road. The three of them walked the 7 miles up to the cabin. Dr. Pearl walked slowly, but he walked. They spent 4 days on the parcel. Pearl took samples from the daylighting vein behind the cabin. Pearl took samples from 3 other points along the strike. Pearl measured the flow of the stream. Pearl read the 1958 survey twice. Pearl read Hollis Brennan's water rights filing. Pearl sat on the porch in the evenings and read Hollis Brennan's journal, which Caleb had given him. On the 4th evening, Pearl sat with Caleb and Coons at the table in the cabin and laid out what he had found. He said, "Mr. Brennan, Dr. Carstens did good work in 1958. The vein is real. The grades he reported are accurate. I sampled in 4 places. The uranium grade is 0.8% at the daylighting and 0.6% at the deepest sample I could reach. The copper grade is consistently above 3%. Those are commercial grades. Those are very strong commercial grades." Caleb said, "What does that mean in money?" Pearl said, "Uranium markets are volatile. So is copper. But on a conservative 30-year extraction schedule, with current spot prices and current cost of extraction figures, this parcel's mineral estate alone has a net present value, after taxes and royalties, of somewhere between $190 million and $220 million. Caleb did not move. Coons exhaled. Pearl said, "That is the mineral estate. We are not finished." Pearl said, "The water rights are senior on a year-round mountain stream in a basin where senior water rights have not been issued in 43 years. The stream's measured flow is 6.1 cubic feet per second in late summer, which is exceptional for this elevation. The Wyoming State Engineer's Office has confirmed that your filing is intact, perfected, and transferable. There are 3 municipalities in this state and 2 large agricultural operations who would pay a substantial sum for those rights, either outright or in a leasing arrangement." Caleb said, "How much?" Pearl said, $45 to $55 million, depending on how the lease is structured. Caleb said, "So the parcel?" Pearl said, "The parcel, as a whole, with mineral rights and water rights conservatively, is worth $265 million. The cabin was quiet. The wood stove ticked. Caleb said, "All right." Pearl smiled. Pearl had been a professor for 50 years, and he had said $265 million to a great many men in his career. He had never heard one say "all right." He said, "Mr. Brennan, That is not an all right number. Caleb said, I know what kind of number it is. He sat there for a moment. He turned his tin cup in his hand. He said, Doctor, there's a mining company in Salt Lake. Continental Resources. They've been writing my uncle since 1973. Last offer was $50,000 in 2004. I want to talk to them. I want to know what they knew. Pearl said they knew exactly what we just confirmed. The Carson Survey is a public document. It has been filed with the state since 1958. Anyone who looked could find it. Continental's lawyer found it. He has been lowballing your uncle for 30 years, hoping the old man would die without an heir and the parcel would revert to the state, at which point Continental would buy it at auction for the assessed value. $2,400. That was their plan. Your uncle's plan was simpler. He was waiting for a Brennan. Caleb said he found one. Now if you're still with me on this one, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. There's a lot more coming, because the part where the homeless mountain man walks into a Salt Lake City conference room in his coat and his boots is the part you do not want to miss. The next morning, Marshall Coons drove Dr. Pearl back to Laramie. Caleb walked back to the cabin alone for one more night. He sat on the porch. He watched the deer in the meadow. He thought about the part of his life that was about to end. In the morning, he walked back down the mountain. He met Coons at Foley's place. Coons drove him to Cheyenne. They sat in the office of Bickel and Maurer for 3 hours. Whitcomb Bickel was 81 years old. He had been Hollis Brennan's lawyer since 1968. He confirmed everything. The deed was clean. The mineral rights were perfected. The water rights were senior. The estate had been waiting for Caleb for 14 months. Bickel had hired 3 private investigators in 3 different states. 2 of them had given up. The third had finally tracked Caleb through a Riverton Haycrew payroll record. Bickel signed the deed transfer. Caleb signed it. Coons signed as a witness. Caleb was now the legal owner of 80 acres of land in the Wind River Range, of all subsurface mineral rights to that land, and of senior water rights to a year-round mountain stream. He had walked into the office in cracked boots, a coat that was 3 winters old, and a felt hat that had been his father's. He walked out of the office the same way. That afternoon, Caleb and Coons drove to Salt Lake City. 6 hours. They checked into a motel off the interstate. Caleb slept on top of the bedspread because he was not used to a bed and the mattress was too soft. In the morning, Caleb walked into the offices of Continental Resources, Incorporated. He asked for Marcus Krell. The receptionist looked at him. The receptionist looked at his boots. The receptionist looked at his coat. The receptionist asked if he had an appointment. Caleb said no. The receptionist asked if she could tell Mr. Krell what this was about. Caleb said, "Tell him a Brennan walked up the mountain." The receptionist made a call. The receptionist hung up. The receptionist said very softly, "Mr. Krell will see you right away." Marcus Krell was a tall man in a gray suit. He was 45 years old. He had been writing offer letters to Hollis Brennan since 2004, and he had not heard back on any of them. He had not expected to hear back ever. He had been waiting for Hollis to die. Krell shook Caleb's hand. Krell's hand was soft. Caleb's hand was not. Krell sat Caleb down in a conference room with a glass wall. Krell offered Caleb coffee. Caleb took it. Krell sat across the table. Krell said, "Mr. Brennan, I'm very sorry for the loss of your uncle. I had hoped to meet him in person one day." Caleb said, "You wrote him letters for 30 years. He read every one." Krell said, "We had hoped to come to a fair arrangement with him." Caleb said, $50,000 for $265 million of mineral and water rights is not a fair arrangement. The room went still. Krell had not expected the number. Krell had expected the man in the boots to know what the parcel was worth in surface acres. Krell had not expected him to know the figure inside Continental's own internal valuation memo, which was $268 million. Krell said slowly, "Mr. Brennan, may I ask who advised you?" Caleb said, "Dr. Wilbur Pearl, Professor Emeritus of Economic Geology, University of Wyoming. Retired. Independent. Not on anyone's payroll." Krell sat back in his chair. Krell said, "Mr. Brennan, I will be candid with you. We are prepared to discuss a substantially revised offer." Caleb said, "I'm not selling." Krell said, "Mr. Brennan." Caleb said, "I'm not selling the mineral estate to anyone. Not to Continental Resources. Not to anyone else. I'm going to lease the extraction rights to a mining operator I select on a royalty basis. I'm going to pick that operator based on their environmental record and the way they treat the land. The water rights I'm going to lease to a coalition of municipalities and conservation organizations on a long-term basis with priority for in-stream flow protection. Continental Resources is welcome to bid on the extraction lease. So is every other operator in the industry. The bidding will be open and transparent, and my lawyer in Cheyenne will run it." Krell did not speak for a long moment. Krell said, "You understand what you're walking away from." Caleb said, "I'm not walking away from anything. I'm walking towards something. You wanted the parcel for $2,400. You are not getting the parcel for $2,400. You may bid on the lease like everyone else." He stood up. He said, "Mr. Krell, my uncle waited 30 years for a letter from you that offered him what the land was worth. He died without ever receiving one. I am not going to wait 30 years. I'm 60 years old and I sleep outside. I'm going to settle this in 12 months. He set the coffee cup down. He walked out. Coons drove him back to Wyoming. The bidding ran for 4 months. 7 operators submitted proposals. The winner was a mid-sized firm out of Idaho called Sawtooth Mineral, which had a 30-year record of clean reclamation work and a published policy of leaving water tables and surface meadows intact. They were not the highest bidder. They were the second highest. Caleb signed with them anyway. The water rights lease ran for 6 months. The winner was a consortium of 3 municipalities and a regional water conservancy. The deal included a binding in-stream flow protection for the upper stream that ran through the cabin meadow. The stream would never be diverted in a way that would dry it out. The trout would stay. The deer would still come down to drink in the evening. The total settlement, after legal fees and taxes, was $265,140,000, paid into a trust set up by Bickel and Maurer. Caleb put 80% of the trust into a charitable foundation. The foundation was named the Hollis Brennan Veterans Foundation. It had one mission: to purchase, build, and operate long-term transitional housing for homeless veterans in Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and South Dakota. The first facility opened in Casper with 30 beds. By the 5th year, there were 11 facilities, more than 2,000 beds, and a policy of never placing a veteran on a waiting list longer than 30 days. Caleb did not run the foundation. He did not want to run anything with a desk in it. He picked a board of directors carefully. 3 of them were veterans who had come up off the street. 2 were pro bono lawyers. 1 was Marshall Coons, retired. 1 was Dr. Wilbur Pearl. The other 20% of the trust paid for a small set of personal things. It paid for the cabin to be repaired. Caleb did most of the work himself. He hired a carpenter from Crowheart for the roof and a stonemason for the chimney. He did not put electricity in. He did not put a road up to it. He put a new bunk in, a new table, a new stove, new windows in the old frames, a new door on the old hinges. It paid for a small bunkhouse on the lower edge of the meadow. 4 beds, a wood stove, a kitchen, and outhouse. The bunkhouse was for veterans who came up to spend a week or 2 on the mountain. There was no charge. There was no paperwork. It paid for a marker in the cemetery in Crowheart, on Hollis Brennan's grave. The marker was a single piece of pink granite cut from the rock outcrop behind the cabin. The marker said, Hollis Brennan, 1908 to 1986. He held the mountain for a Brennan who came. Caleb did not buy a house in any town. He spent winters at the bunkhouse in Casper, working in the kitchen. He spent springs working the fences at Foley's ranch. He spent summers and falls at the cabin. He chopped his own wood. He fished in the stream. He read in the evenings by the kerosene lamp. He had become a man with $265 million in a trust, and he had not changed a single one of his habits. In the 3rd year after the deed transfer, Marcus Krell came up the mountain. Krell came in a rented 4-wheel drive with a hired guide. They walked the last 7 miles. By the time they reached the meadow, Krell was sweating through a shirt that had cost more than a month of Caleb's old hay crew wages. Caleb was on the porch splitting kindling. He looked up. He did not stop splitting. Krell sat on the porch step. Krell said, Mr. Brennan, I came to apologize. For 30 years our firm wrote letters to your uncle that were not honest offers. They were lowball offers designed to wear him down. The Carson survey was a public document. We knew he had read it. We wrote the letters anyway. I have left Continental Resources. I am trying to make a different living than the one I made before. Caleb set the splitting maul down. He said, there's a chair on the porch. Sit in it. I'll pour you a cup of coffee. Krell sat. Caleb came out with 2 tin cups. The wind came down off the rock outcrop and worked through the aspen. Krell said, why didn't you take the money for yourself? Most of it. You could have bought a house anywhere in this country. Caleb said, I slept outside for 12 years because I chose to. It was hard and it was honest. There are men who slept outside because they had no choice. Men I served with. Those men were left outside. The money belongs to those men. I have a cabin. I have a stove. I have a stream. That is more than I had before and more than I needed. Krell nodded. Caleb said, my uncle waited 39 years for the right Brennan to walk up this mountain. I hope he would have liked what I did. Krell said he would have liked it, Mr. Brennan. Krell stood. He shook Caleb's hand. He walked down off the mountain with the guide. Caleb watched them go, then split kindling until the light was gone. In the cabin, he banked the stove. He lit the kerosene lamp. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. He uncapped a pen. He wrote in slow, careful handwriting at the top, to the next Brennan who walks up this mountain. He wrote for an hour. About Hollis. About the survey of 1958. About the water rights of 1947. About the long walk from Riverton. About Dr. Pearl. About the foundation. About the trout in the stream and the deer in the meadow. He wrote at the bottom, if you are reading this, you are the Brennan who came. Do not sell this place. Sit on the porch. Drink coffee. Watch the meadow. Hollis Brennan held this mountain for me. I held it for you. Take care of it. Take care of the men who sleep outside. Caleb Brennan. He sealed the envelope. He wrote on the front, for the next Brennan. He walked to the cellar and set it on top of the surveys and his uncle's journal. He closed the trunk. He stood in the meadow. The mountain was quiet. The stream was running. The deer were grazing. He had been a homeless man. He had walked 4 days to a cabin he did not know. He had inherited $265 million. He had given almost all of it away. He had built homes for men who slept outside. He had kept the mountain. He went back inside the cabin. The kerosene lamp burned low. He sat in the chair. He drank his coffee. The man who had been handed nothing sat in his cabin on the side of a mountain his uncle had held for 39 years, and he watched, through the window, the lights of stars come on one by one over the Wind River Range. He had everything he wanted. He had it because he had walked up the mountain.